I never spoke to the man who sat beside me every day, but he knew my face, my expressions. Even the way I looked when I thought no one was watching, I noticed him the same way you notice the sound of a clock after it stops ticking. Suddenly, too clearly. Every morning at 8:12, I boarded the same train. Third carriage, second row from the door, window seat. That routine was mine. A small pocket of predictability in a city that never asked how I was feeling. And every morning for almost 3 months, the seat next to me was taken by the same man. He never spoke, never smiled, never wore headphones. He carried a worn leather bag and a sketchbook that looked older than both of us. At first, I thought he was just another commuter, one of the thousands who shared space without sharing lives. But then I noticed patterns. The way he always sat down after me. The way he angled his body slightly away as if trying not to intrude. The way his pencil moved constantly even when the train jolted or slowed. He was always sketching. I told myself not to look. That staring would be rude. That curiosity would turn into discomfort. But it is hard not to notice when someone beside you is creating something every single day. Sometimes I caught quick flashes of graphite lines, a curve, a shadow, the suggestion of a face. I assumed landscapes, strangers, memories. Never once did it occur to me that it could be me. I liked the silence between us. It felt intentional, almost respectful, like we had silently agreed not to disturb each other's mornings. Once the train was delayed and we sat there longer than usual, our shoulders nearly touched. I could smell pencil shavings and coffee. My phone buzzed with notifications I didn't want to answer. His pencil paused for the first time. I felt his eyes on me then, not lingering, not invasive, just a glance, quick, like he was checking something against a memory. I looked straight ahead. I don't know why my heart started beating faster. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted slightly. My routine stayed the same. So did his. Until one morning, when the train lurched sharply and his sketchbook slipped from his hand and landed open on the floor between our feet. I looked before I could stop myself, and I forgot how to breathe, because staring back at me from the page was my face. Not a version of me posed or smiling, but me exactly as I sat there. Tired eyes, loose hair, that tiny crease between my brows I never noticed in mirrors. He reached for the sketchbook at the same moment I did. Our fingers brushed. His hand froze. I looked at him for the first time, and he looked terrified. What would you do if you discovered a stranger had been quietly observing you every day? I didn't say anything at first. Neither did he. The train hummed around us, doors sliding, people shifting, an entire city moving forward while we stayed frozen over a single page. He closed the sketchbook slowly, like it might shatter if moved too fast. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was quiet, almost practiced in being careful. I didn't mean for you to see. You drew me, I said. It came out steadier than I felt. He nodded once. No excuses. No nervous laugh, just honesty sitting between us. I draw what's in front of me, he said, and you're always there. That should have made me angry. It should have made me uncomfortable enough to stand up and leave. Instead, it made something inside me loosen, like a truth I hadn't known I was waiting to hear. How long? I asked. Since the first week, he said. I noticed the way you stare out the window like you're remembering something you don't want back. That sentence landed too close to home. I looked away. The city blurred past. I wondered how many people had looked at me and seen nothing. My name is Elias, he added. You don't have to tell me yours. I appreciated that, the lack of pressure, the way he wasn't trying to step over an invisible line. I'm Mira, I said anyway. He smiled then. Just a little. Like he had been hoping, but not expecting it. The rest of the ride passed differently. We didn't talk much, but the silence felt altered, charged. When my stop came, I stood up. He didn't follow, he didn't ask for anything. But as the doors closed, he held up the sketchbook and turned to a blank page. The next morning, he was there again. Same seat, same sketchbook. But this time, he didn't open it right away. Is it still okay? He asked, if I draw you? I thought about the question all day before answering it. About being seen, about control, about the strange comfort of knowing someone noticed the quiet parts. Yes, I said, but only if you let me see them. There was a pause after that, thick and fragile. I felt exposed, but not unsafe. Like opening a window in a room I had lived in too long. The train rattled. People laughed. Life continued. Yet something subtle had shifted. A boundary had been named and respected. I realized I wanted to sit in this moment longer, to learn why he noticed details others missed, to understand what he saw when he looked at me. I wasn't promising anything beyond this ride. I wasn't rewriting my life. I was simply allowing the morning to be different. Sometimes that is how change begins. Quietly, with permission. I breathed in, held it, and let the moment settle into me, unsure but willing to stay present for now without expectations or fear at all today. He smiled wider this time, and the train kept moving. If you were Mira, would you have allowed him to keep drawing you or walked away the next morning? I didn't realize how much my mornings had depended on not knowing him until knowing him became part of them. Elias didn't talk while he drew. He watched quietly, respectfully, like the act required silence. I found myself sitting differently, aware of my hands, my posture, my face when I thought. Not posing, just noticing. The sketches changed. At first they were careful, observational, lines mapping my profile, the fall of my hair, the tilt of my head against the glass. Then slowly they became something else. Me laughing at a message, me closing my eyes when the train rocked, me staring forward, jaw tight, holding something back. One morning I asked what he saw when he looked at me. He thought for a long moment. Someone who listens more than she speaks, he said. Someone who feels things deeply but edits herself for the world. That sentence followed me off the train, into meetings, into conversations where I nodded instead of disagreed, into moments where I swallowed words that deserved air. I started watching him too. The way his brow furrowed when he erased, the way his fingers smudged graphite without noticing, the faint scar near his thumb. He wasn't mysterious in a dramatic way. He was simply focused, as if drawing anchored him to something steady. A week later, he turned the sketchbook toward me without being asked. There were dozens of pages, all of me, not identical, not repetitive. Each version captured a different morning, a different emotion I hadn't realized I carried. I felt exposed again, but also strangely honored, like he had been archiving my inner weather. You don't draw yourself, I said. He shook his head. I don't know how. That stayed with me. The idea that someone could see others so clearly while remaining a blur to themselves. The train stopped between stations that day. Lights dimmed. Murmurs rose. In the reflection of the window, I saw us sitting side by side, our images overlapping slightly. For a brief moment, it felt intentional, like we'd been placed there. Can I draw you? I asked. He looked startled. Me? Yes, I said. So you don't disappear. He laughed softly, not unkindly, not nervously, just surprised. He handed me the pencil. Our fingers touched again. This time, neither of us pulled away. I wasn't an artist. My lines were uncertain, clumsy. But as I drew him, I noticed things he never mentioned. The tired kindness in his eyes, the way his shoulders carried invisible weight. I realized seeing goes both ways, even when it begins silently. When my stop came, neither of us moved right away. We sat there until the doors chimed again. Some connections don't announce themselves. They unfold, slowly, like graphite building, meaning one line at a time. I did not know where this was leading, but for the first time in years, I felt curious instead of cautious, and that feeling was enough for now on this train morning alone. Have you ever felt truly seen by someone who barely knew you? And how did it change you? It happened without planning. The crossing of a line we both pretended didn't exist. One morning, the train pulled in early, and for the first time in months, I stood up before he did. I hesitated in the aisle, unsure why my feet wouldn't move. This is me, I said, gesturing vaguely, meaning more than just the stop. Elias closed the sketchbook. Me too. We stepped onto the platform together. The air felt different outside the train, sharper, louder. The spell of our shared silence thinned, replaced by the awareness of everything else. People rushed past us. No one noticed how strange it felt to stand there with him in daylight. I usually walk that way, I said. I usually don't walk anywhere with anyone, he replied. That made me smile. We walked side by side without touching. Our steps were slightly out of sync at first, then gradually aligned. I noticed how tall he was when he wasn't folded into a train seat, how his quietness didn't vanish but adjusted, like a radio tuned to a new frequency. I'm not following you, he said suddenly. I just want that clear. I know, I said, and I did. We stopped at the corner where our paths separated. The city stretched ahead, full of noise and obligation. This was the moment stories usually decided themselves. Exchange numbers, make promises, or walk away and keep the memory intact. Elias reached into his bag and tore a page from the back of the sketchbook. It was blank. In case you ever want to draw again, he said. No pressure. I took it. Our fingers brushed. Again. I might, I said. I like how it feels. So do I, he said. Then he stepped back, giving me space instead of taking it. That mattered more than he knew. The next days were different. He didn't sit beside me every morning. Sometimes he arrived later, sometimes earlier, sometimes not at all. I told myself not to read into it, that whatever this was needed room to breathe. When he did sit beside me, the drawings were fewer but deeper. Less about how I looked and more about how I existed. One page showed my hands folded tightly. Another showed me leaning forward, alert, awake. I realized he was drawing change. One morning he wrote something beneath the sketch, a single sentence. You look like someone who is learning how to take up space. I stared at it longer than I should have. That afternoon I spoke up in a meeting instead of nodding. That evening I said no to a plan I didn't want. That night I looked at my reflection and didn't immediately search for flaws. The next morning the seat next to me was empty. For the first time since I'd noticed him, I felt something close to fear. Not of being watched, but of being unseen again. I watched the doors until they closed. The train moved, my heart sank, and I told myself this was normal. This was how quiet things ended, until I felt a folded page pressed gently into my hand. I looked up. Elias was standing in the aisle smiling. Do you think some connections need distance to grow, or does distance risk losing them forever? I didn't ask where he had been sitting. I didn't ask why he waited until the doors closed to move. Some questions feel safer when left unopened, like sealed envelopes you are not ready to read. The folded page in my hand wasn't a drawing. It was a list, short lines written in careful handwriting, things I noticed before I ever drew you. I looked up at him. He was already returning to his seat, not beside me this time, but across the aisle. Close enough, different enough. The train moved, the city blurred. I unfolded the page slowly. You hum when you're anxious. You press your thumb into your ring finger when you're thinking. You stop reading 3 pages before your stop and stare ahead. You smile at nothing sometimes like you're remembering someone kindly. My throat tightened. None of these things appeared in sketches. They lived between moments. Invisible habits I didn't know anyone saw. I folded the page and held it to my chest. When I looked back up, he was watching me carefully, ready to apologize if he'd crossed another line. You never drew these, I said. He shook his head. Some things shouldn't be captured, only noticed. That answer stayed with me longer than anything he had ever sketched. Days passed. We began talking more. Not about our pasts, not about where this was going, just about small things. Books we abandoned halfway through, songs that felt like weather, the strange intimacy of routines. I learned he worked nights illustrating children's books that rarely sold, that he loved trains because they moved without asking questions, that silence wasn't emptiness for him, it was shelter. He learned I hated mirrors but loved reflections, that I kept my phone on silent to avoid disappointing people, that I had once been loud and learned to be careful instead. One morning I asked if he would ever draw himself. He thought about it longer than usual. Maybe, he said, when I know what to keep and what to leave out. I realized then that art wasn't the only thing he edited. Weeks blended together. The train became less important than the moments inside it. The seat next to me was no longer just a place. It was a choice we kept making. Until one morning when he didn't show up at all. No late arrival, no note, no standing smile in the aisle. I waited through 3 stops. My chest grew tight. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that no one owes you consistency just because they offered attention. The next day, he still wasn't there. On the 3rd day, I found an envelope tucked into the seat beside me, my name written carefully on the front. Inside was a drawing I had never seen before. Me standing alone on the platform looking down the tracks. Beneath it, a sentence. Some things leave so you can see what stays. I folded the paper slowly. My hands were steady. My heart was not. I didn't know if this was an ending or a pause. I only knew it mattered, and that whatever came next would ask something of me too. Do you believe some people enter your life to be permanent, or only to teach you how to see yourself? I carried the drawing with me all day like a quiet weight. It bent every thought slightly off center. At work, I reread emails without absorbing them. At lunch, I watched people pass and wondered how many stories sat unnoticed beside me. I kept hearing his sentence in my head, not like a goodbye, more like an instruction I hadn't learned yet. The next morning, I arrived early, earlier than I ever had. The platform was cold and almost empty. I chose a spot near the middle and stood facing the tracks, just like in the drawing. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for him to arrive beside me. I was waiting to see if I would stay. The train came, doors opened, I stepped inside and took my usual seat. The one next to me stayed empty. I felt the familiar pull to retreat into myself, to accept silence as the final word. Then I stood up. My heart pounded as I walked through the carriage, scanning faces. Every stranger looked wrong, too loud, too closed, too unaware. At the far end, I saw him standing by the doors, sketchbook closed, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked like someone bracing for disappointment. Elias, I said. He looked up fast, like he hadn't expected his name to exist outside his head. Relief and fear crossed his face in equal measure. You left, I said, not accusing, just naming it. I didn't know how to stay without turning it into something fragile, he said. And I didn't want to trap you inside a habit that felt safe but never moved. I understood that more than I wanted to. I had done the same thing in different ways, leaving before being left, editing myself out of endings. I don't want to be a drawing you stop, I said. I want to be a person who chooses. He swallowed. So do I. We sat together then, not in our old seats, but on opposite sides of the aisle facing each other. No sketchbook between us, just words. I'm not good at starting things, he said. I'm better at observing them. I'm tired of being observed, I replied. I want to be met. The train moved, the city passed. Something shifted again, this time heavier, realer. When my stop came, I didn't stand right away. Walk with me, I said. He didn't hesitate. Outside the station, the morning felt wide and unfamiliar. We walked without direction, letting the city choose for us. At a small cafe, we sat by the window. No sketches, no lists, just hands wrapped around warm cups. This doesn't have to be everything, he said carefully. I know, I said, but it can be something we don't hide from. He nodded. The tension eased, not resolved, just acknowledged. As we stood to leave, he reached into his bag and pulled out the sketchbook. He tore out a page and handed it to me. On it was a single line drawing, two people sitting across from each other. No faces, no details. Us, he said. I smiled, not because I knew what came next, but because for the first time I wasn't afraid to find out. Do you think it's harder to speak first or to stay when things stop feeling safe? After that morning, the train stopped being the center of our story. It was still there, still carrying us, but it no longer held all the meaning. We met outside it now, coffee before work, walks that didn't lead anywhere, evenings where we sat side by side, doing different things and called it time together. Elias was still quiet. That didn't change, but I learned the language of his quiet. The pauses that meant thinking, the ones that meant fear, the rare ones that meant he didn't know how to ask for something. He learned my noise, the way I filled space when I was nervous, the questions I asked instead of admitting I wanted reassurance, the jokes I used to soften truths that deserved weight. One night I asked him why he never drew himself. He looked at the sketchbook like it might answer for him. When I draw others, he said, I know where to stop. With myself, I don't. That scared me more than I let on. The idea of someone who could disappear into their own lines, who could erase themselves trying to get it right. I started noticing when he faded, when his voice dropped, when his shoulders curved inward, and I learned to say his name gently, like an anchor. He started noticing when I retreated, when my sentences shortened, when my eyes stopped asking, and he learned to sit with me instead of filling the quiet. We weren't perfect. We misread each other. We pulled back at the same time and waited too long. Once we argued about nothing and everything, he accused me of rushing. I accused him of hiding. Both of us were right. After that fight, he didn't draw for weeks. I told myself it didn't matter. That art was his, not a measure of us. But I missed it. Not the image, the intention. The way drawing had once been his way of staying present. One evening, he handed me the sketchbook without a word. Inside was the first drawing of himself. It wasn't flattering. It wasn't finished. It showed him sitting alone at a table, head slightly bowed, hands folded together. Beneath it, he had written, I exist even when I am not observed. I felt tears rise unexpectedly. Not because of sadness, because of relief. You don't have to disappear to be gentle, I told him. He looked at me then, fully. No editing, no retreat. And you don't have to perform to be chosen. We sat there for a long time after that. No need to move, no need to decide what this was becoming. Just two people learning how to stay visible to themselves and each other. Later that night, he added another drawing. Not of me alone, not of him alone, but of us sitting together on the floor, backs against the wall, quiet but solid. For the first time, I understood that love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grows in the space where two people stop hiding. Do you think understanding someone's silence can be as important as understanding their words? The closer we grew, the more exposed I felt. Not to him, to myself. Being seen without performance stripped away habits I had worn for years. I couldn't hide behind charm or distance. Elias noticed when my smile arrived too fast. When my laugh covered fear, he never called it out, he just waited. That waiting was louder than confrontation. One evening, we stood on the platform after missing our train. The next one wouldn't come for 15 minutes. The sky was heavy with clouds and the air smelled like rain. He watched people pass with that familiar, quiet focus. You're pulling away, he said softly. I opened my mouth to deny it, closed it again. There was no point. I don't know how to stay when something matters, I admitted. I'm afraid if I relax into it, it will be taken. He nodded like he'd been expecting that answer. When I was younger, he said, I thought observing meant safety. If I never stepped into the frame, nothing could hurt me. And did it work? I asked. No, he said. It just made me lonely in very detailed ways. That made me laugh. A real laugh. The kind that releases tension instead of covering it. A week later, he asked if he could draw us again. Not sitting, not quiet, moving. He wanted to draw us walking through the city. I agreed, though it scared me. Movement felt like proof, like something that could be lost. When he showed me the drawing, my chest tightened. It wasn't romantic, it was honest. Two people slightly out of step, hands close but not touching, faces turned toward each other mid-sentence. That's how it feels, and I said. He smiled. Unfinished. That word followed me into a conversation I had been avoiding for months, with myself, about what I wanted, about what I was allowed to ask for. That night, I told him about the version of me I used to be, the loud one, the one who believed wanting was not a weakness. I told him how shrinking had felt like maturity until it felt like disappearance. He listened without interrupting, without fixing. When I finished, he reached for my hand, not tentative, not rushed, just present. You don't have to be smaller with me, he said, and I don't have to be quieter. It was the first time we touched without uncertainty. The next morning, the train was crowded. No seats together. We stood apart, swaying with the movement. When I caught his eye across the carriage, he lifted his sketchbook slightly, then lowered it again. He didn't draw. Instead, he watched me like someone choosing presence over habit. I watched him back. No glass between us, no paper. Being seen had once felt like exposure. Now it felt like alignment, like stepping into the same rhythm and trusting it would hold. I didn't know what the future looked like, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to be visible inside it. What scares you more, being deeply seen or asking for what you truly want? Change rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as practicality. One evening, Elias told me he'd been offered a short-term project illustrating a book in another city. 3 months, maybe more. He said it carefully, like the words might bruise me. My first reaction was to shrink, to nod, to say that sounded great, to pretend distance had never unsettled me. Instead, I breathed. I don't want to pretend this doesn't matter, I said. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. Neither do I. We sat on my floor surrounded by half-finished drawings and coffee cups. No train, no schedule, just us and a decision that couldn't be sketched away. I don't want to disappear again, he said, but I also don't want to stay still out of fear. I understood that tension too well. I had stayed small to avoid loss and still lost pieces of myself. Go, I said finally, but don't leave me in silence. He smiled softly. I won't. The last morning before he left, the train felt heavier. The seat next to me was empty, even though he stood beside me. We didn't sit. We watched the doors. I'm scared, I admitted. So am I, he said. That's how I know this is real. When the train arrived, he didn't get on. I did. The doors closed between us. For the first time, separation was literal. The days after were strange. The seat next to me stayed empty, but my phone filled with sketches sent at odd hours. Cafes, street corners, windows, always with a note. I see you here. This reminds me of your hands. This is where I would sit if you were beside me. I started sending him my own drawings. Messy, inexact, honest. I drew trains, empty seats, myself learning how to wait without shrinking. Weeks passed. The absence softened. It didn't vanish, but it stopped hurting sharply. One morning, a woman sat beside me. She glanced at my sketchbook and smiled. You draw, she said. I'm learning, I replied. When Elias returned, it wasn't dramatic. No running, no grand reveal. He simply appeared in the aisle one morning and sat down like he belonged there, because he did. He opened his sketchbook and showed me the last drawing from his time away. It was the empty seat next to me. Not lonely, not abandoned, just waiting. I learned something, he said. Space doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it's room. I leaned my head against his shoulder. The train moved, the city unfolded, the seat next to me was no longer empty, and neither was I. Do you believe distance strengthens connection, or does it only reveal what was already there? We never returned to exactly how things were. The seat next to me was still ours, but it no longer held the weight of beginnings. It held something steadier, chosen, the kind of closeness that survives movement. Elias still carried his sketchbook, but he didn't open it every morning. Some days we talked. Some days we sat in silence that felt earned. The drawings came when they needed to, not out of habit, not out of fear of missing something. One morning I asked him if he still drew me when I wasn't there. Sometimes, he said, but not to hold on, just to remember how it feels to notice. I liked that answer. I had changed too. I spoke more, took up space without apologizing. I didn't feel the need to fold myself into corners anymore. Being seen had taught me how to stay. We talked about the future without forcing it into shape, about cities that felt possible, about work that mattered, about how love didn't have to rush to prove itself. On the anniversary of the day his sketchbook first fell open, he handed me a wrapped package on the train. Inside was a new sketchbook, blank, heavy, waiting. For you, he said. Not so you draw me, so you draw yourself. I ran my fingers over the empty pages. For once, blank didn't feel intimidating. It felt like permission. I opened to the first page and drew the simplest thing I could. 2 seats on a train, side by side. No faces, no details, just presence. That's it, he said quietly. We got off at the same stop and walked together into the morning. The city no longer felt like something I had to survive. It felt like something I could participate in. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who sat alone, staring out the window, believing she was invisible. I want to tell her that being noticed isn't the same as being understood. And being understood isn't the same as being chosen. The seat next to me was never just a place. It was an invitation. One I learned to accept not because someone saw me, but because I learned to stay when I was seen. Elias squeezed my hand as we crossed the street. No drawing, no observation, just presence. The train passed behind us, full of strangers and quiet stories beginning without warning. I didn't look back. Do you think love is about finding the right person or becoming ready to be seen by them?